and welcome to Book Witches with a B. My name is Orja.
My name's Colleen.
And we have a podcast called Book Witches with a B, where we talk about some of our favorite books, and we like to do deep dive discussions. To give you some background, I studied literature in college.
Yeah, I studied sociology with a minor in cinema and literature.
And so we're going to bring those lenses in to talk about some of our favorite fantasy books on this podcast. So if you enjoy reading and you enjoy like book club type discussions, join us.
Join us, y'all.
Welcome to Book Witches with a V. We are going to be talking about chapters 6 through 10 of Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros today. And let me tell you, my chapter recap has a lot of opinions in it, so get ready.
Oh, I'm excited.
Chapter recap. All right, so Chapter 6 starts right after Imogen snaps Violet's shoulder in the sparring ring on assessment day. So Dane is carrying Violet into the healer's quadrant from the Dragon Rider's quadrant. And he's being Dane, so he's very worried. And basically, we find out everyone in the infirmary knows Violet because of her condition. Her body's very weak, and so Winifred, one of like the main healers, is like, we're taking her to bed, and we're gonna call Nolan. Nolan is a mender. So healers don't have magic; they use like medicine, herbs, poultices, tinctures, things like that. But one of the signets of dragon riders that you can get is mending, which is basically being able to fix everything back to the way it was before it was broken. And so menders are, what menders like Nolan are dispatched to the healing quadrant whenever there's like a really serious injury. And so while they're trying to go and get Nolan, Dane tries to argue that Nolan should not heal. Nolan should not be summoned and he should not heal Violet. His reasoning, he thinks that if Violet stays injured, they can sneak her into the Scribes Quadrant because they'll have pity on her and she can spend the rest of her first year in the first year of the Scribe Quadrant. Winifred shuts him down and is like, no, Nolan and I will mend Violet. Violet shuts him down and is like, I am not going to the Scribes Quadrant. I'm staying here. And then she also proceeds to be like, you can mend me this one time, but I don't want you to mend me every time because if people hear that I need mending so often, they're going to know that I'm weak and they're going to see me as a target. To which Dane is like, exactly, that's why you need to get to the Scribes Quadrant. While all of this is happening, Violet's taken medicine that's made her very loopy, and if you have listened to the audiobook, this part's very funny. The voice actor does a very good job of like slurring her words and like, basically Violet is trying to participate in a conversation about herself that Dane is having with Winifred and then later with Nolan about how she does need to be mended. This is the only time she wants to be mended and she's not going to the Scribes Quadrant. It's not happening. Basically, so Dane is basically like, we're taking you to the Scribes Quadrant. Don't mend her. I don't know. I don't understand how that correlates with
the logic. So I know we're not supposed to interject now, but I'm going to.
Go for
it. This does not make sense to me because it's not like they know menders are an option.
Yeah.
Like just taking her. I know he's panicking. He's in a panic mode. He's trying to figure it out. He's not. Rebecca Yarros loves Dane. I'm trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Okay. This would also bug me. I also think he's taking into account, but I do think he is fully panicking and trying to figure it all out. But
he is. He is ignoring Violet's choice in the matter completely. But
which is not great.
It's not great.
I think he feels like he doesn't have a choice in it, and I think that's the thing that he's struggling with. I think which is kind of not wrong. I mean, technically her mother, she didn't really have a choice.
She didn't.
Her mother forced her into it.
But now, at this point, she's had several choices. It's fine. You're right.
She does.
However, you're also wrong.
I don't like this situation, and I would be frustrated, but I also understand if you are someone who is a protective person and naturally wants to be protective of how, like, you're just running through all of the scenarios and you're like, maybe this one will work, maybe this one will work. You should definitely still listen to the person that you're trying to protect, because then you're not protecting anymore, you're just controlling. Uh,
For anyone who's listening and not watching, I'm shaking my head at Colleen. It's fine.
Anywho, I don't like this behavior either. I would have punched him in the face regardless of how loopy
Yes.
as heck I was, and maybe my shoulder dislocated, but
Yes.
I get where he's coming from to a degree.
So while Loopy Violet is like, just trying her best to stand up for herself in her loopy state, Nolan actually says something very interesting. He says that he's never agreed with the forced conscription of the children of the rebellion. And like just like a throwaway line, just a tidbit that I thought was important. And then Dane once again asks that Violet not be mended so that they can sneak her to the scribe's quadrant. Violet shuts him down again. Um, I have a note here that says this chapter should be named Dane mansplains Violet's situation to her while disregarding her right to make her own choices.
Actually, yeah. You, yes. He definitely
So
let his
mad.
first year go to his head.
So
100%.
mad. Nolan does end up mending Violet. So later that night, like way later that night, Violet goes back to the barracks and she's in a sling, so she's like worrying that other people will see her because she doesn't want to be seen as weak and more of a target. I should say, I should just reiterate from the first episode, Dragon Rider's Quadrant is extremely vicious, so the reason that she really doesn't want to be seen as weak, and the reason that Dane is freaking out about it is because cadets will kill other cadets that they deem a liability. Like it's like if you're seen as weak, you're a target to be murdered. So
In a weird way, I think they almost view it as a mercy because they think if we don't kill you, the dragon's gonna kill you
yeah,
regardless. Because I think they reiterated at some point, but they're like dragons look for like viciousness and strength,
yeah,
those two things.
yeah. So
So
there is logic to Dane panicking about Violet being seen as weak. I don't like that he also thinks that she's weak. That makes me very upset. But that's
yes,
fine.
which Violet reiterated even in the first chapter. She was upset that Mira and her mother both were calling
Yeah,
her weak, and she's like, I'm not weak. Which I will say, I do think her mother didn't technically think she was
she
weak.
did
I
not.
think her mother might have been the one person that was
Who's
like, "You're
like
not
Violet
weak."
is strong. Yep.
Yeah.
In a
So
really messed up way, but that's fine. So when she gets back to her bunk, Rhiannon is very happy to see Violet back and promises to help her get ready for the challenges that are going to start in 2 weeks' time. Violet, in return, promises to help Rhiannon with history. As Violet is getting into bed, she notices that there's something under her pillow. It's a small journal with a note from Mira that explains that the journal was delivered by a bribed scribe. And the journal is from Brennan. He wrote it for Mira to help Mira through her first year at the Dragon Riders Quadrant, and Mira added a little bit of information of her own for Violet. We learn at this point in time that according to tradition slash religion, I think, all belongings of a deceased person are supposed to be burned. So this book, this journal, is a secret. And Violet starts calling it the Book of Brennan. So if I mention the Book of Brennan in the future, it's this journal.
which is also very religious, which I find interesting. Not a negative, but just interesting.
No. It's weird how like religion is just casually sprinkled through this
Yeah,
extremely like military world that we are in.
it is. Yeah. It's not like I feel like typically when religion is mentioned in a book, it's like this big overarching thing. It doesn't. Maybe it will be eventually. It's definitely not
Maybe. Yeah,
yet.
definitely not right now. Uh,
Yeah.
so in the journal, written from Brennan to Mira as like in like first person, like he's like talking to Mira basically. He tells Mira that there's a map of where classrooms are and where the teachers' meeting places are. He goes on to talk about the mat challenges. They're not random; they're actually planned 1 week in advance. And although any student can request a challenge with another, their like matches are usually planned out a week in advance. He also says that if one knows where to look, and when to look, one can sneak out and find out where the next week's matches are posted and prepare for the next challenge. And luckily, Violet does, mwahahaha, which I've written here. All right, chapter 7. In the best interest of preserving peace with Navarre, no more than 3 cadets carrying rebellion relics may be assigned to any squad of any quadrant. Addendum 5.2 Basgiath War College Code of Conduct. In addition to last year's changes, marked ones assembling in groups of 3 or more will now be considered an act of seditious conspiracy and is hereby a capital offense. Addendum 5.3 Basgiath War College Code of Conduct. As we've said, the excerpts in the beginning of each chapter, very important.
Incredibly important, yeah.
So, chapter 7 begins about a week later, or a week and a half later. Violet's sneaking out after curfew at night to work on her plan of survival. As she's sneaking out, she notes that her squad is the only one that has not lost a single person thus far into the year.
Mhm.
And she's kind of like, well, I don't know how long that's going to last. Sad. Um, she is sneaking out to collect unripened Fonnelly berries to dry. Ripe, these berries are harmless, but unripened and dried, they are poisonous. And we find out that she's been sneaking out every night for the past 9 nights to collect her poisons, which she has the information for those from her little book of poisons that she took with her. And these are going to be to help her with the upcoming challenges because, as we know, she's physically pretty weak. And so she is going to start fighting the challenges off the map before the challenges start. Violet climbs an oak tree with the vines of the berry and collects them gleefully, might I add. On her way down, Violet notices movement and stays hidden. It's Imogen and Xaden. She remains hidden precariously, basically like if they look up, they're going to see her because the moonlight is very bright tonight. More riders arrive. I think it was maybe like a dozen or 2 dozen. A lot of riders ride, and they all have the rebellion relics. So they're all the marked ones. So this is an illegal meeting. Violet stays hidden where she is and is eavesdropping on the conversation. So she learns that these meetings have been going on for about 2 years now. She realizes that Xaden is actually trying to help the first years survive, and she finds this admirable, begrudgingly. We are introduced to a handful of characters. We get Liam, Garrick, and Bodhi, who is Xaden's cousin. And they're basically like talking about how good Xaden is at fighting. Xaden gives the first years the harsh reality of their situation. There's no way for them to go home, there's no way out. They're conscripted, and this is war, and people will die, essentially. So he's like, giving them tough love because he's been through it and there's no way that, they can there's no way they can be saved. This is just the reality of their situation. Violet notices that Imogen softens when she looks at Xaden, um, which I thought was interesting. It's like all this like
Okay.
cloak and dagger like conspiracy eavesdropping, and then she's like Imogen's eyes softened when she looked at Xaden.
That is a very, like, not in a negative way. That's very much like a girl seeing another girl reaction.
Oh yeah,
Or just being like, what's that
like
mean to
hold
her?
on. Xaden is like, I can't help you if you are trying to like run away and go home. I can't help you. What can I help you with? Like, give me something I can actually help you with. And one of the cadets is like, oh, well, like the battle briefs, I can't keep all the information straight. And Xaden tells the first years that they need to just learn what they're being taught in battle brief. He says, keep what you know, but recite whatever they tell you to. Violet is very confused because, as we know, scribes provide the information for battle brief. So she's like, what do you mean by this? Conspiracy.
Oh,
As the meeting goes on, Violet realizes that there's nothing wrong with this illegal meeting. She decides not to tell Dane because he'd be honor bound to report it, and she doesn't think that these, people should die just for like having kind of a support group meeting, basically. It's like a meeting to like help the first years survive the first year. The group then turns to discussing killing Violet. And Violet's like, oh no. Um, But
Fair.
Xaden says that he himself will handle Violet when the time is right, and Violet is very indignant upon hearing this. She's like, "I'm not just something that needs to be handled. Like, what does he mean?" She's very upset by this, which I think is hilarious. We find out that Dane has punished Imogen with dish duty for using her powers on Violet during the challenge. And then Garrick, surprisingly, argues that punishing children for the sins of their parents is a Navarian way, not a Tirish way, and points out that Violet's already facing like the same death sentence that the rest of them are. Xaden adds that Brennan was killed as well, and so Violet technically has as much a right to hate all of them as they hate her, as they do to hate her. So once Violet is sure that the meeting breaks up and everyone goes, and once Violet is sure that she's alone, she sneaks back down, but Xaden is waiting for her. We find out that Xaden is a shadow wielder. Shadow Daddy.
If you know anything about like books, shadow wielders are a positive. We love them.
They're great. Um, and so because he's a shadow wielder, he knew all along that Violet was hiding and eavesdropping. Um, and then this part, I was a little bit of a hot mess because this whole thing was just very hot. So I'm just going to read verbatim what I wrote. They banter, he threatens her, they argue, she's ready to fight, and it's very hot. Orja, get it together.
Valid. I love a good little sassy banter.
Me too. Violet throws her daggers at the tree behind Xaden and shows him that she has superior aim. Basically, she aimed for his outline, and he backs up to the tree and realizes, like, she literally aimed for his outline. Xaden tells Violet that she should show her dagger trick to Jack. Um, he's like, you should throw a couple daggers at his head, and maybe he'll like stop trying to kill you then. Um, and then he ends up like he gets really close to her and he starts like resheathing her daggers, and like one's at her thigh and one's at her ribs, and it's very hot. Looks like he's not going to kill her. Smiley face. Says me. Violet tells
He's evil. He's hot.
he's
Sorry.
even if he's evil, he's hot. Yes, it's a good point.
Yeah.
Violet tells Xaden she won't rat them out because she doesn't think they should be executed for having a support meeting, and Xaden leaves Violet all hot and bothered, and honestly, same.
I honestly relate to Violet a significant amount in this book.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't art as her, but some of her like emotional reactions, same.
Yeah, same. Chapter 8.
Ooh.
Violet prepares for challenge day and notes that Rhiannon isn't in bed. She's probably with a lover. Um, Violet thinks about Dane and smiles. He's the best part of her day, even when he's being a complete ass. Paraphrasing. Dane is waiting to escort Violet to breakfast duty, where she will poison her opponents that morning, and they run into Rhiannon and Tara, confirming Violet's theory that Rhiannon was indeed with a lover. Then Violet and Dane kind of dance around the subject of Violet's love life. He's curious about it, and she refuses to answer, even though she is very much crushing on Dane.
I do find it very funny that she's just like, Dane has to know it's him, right? Because that's the typical thing of like when someone's like, "Who do you like?" You're like, nobody.
Yeah. He's got it. But I mean, boys are dumb. Like he probably doesn't know.
I mean, it's smart to ask. It's good to ask. She's like, no one, and it's you. You can't say that to them.
Exactly.
And stressful.
Exactly. Dane asks Violet if she's ready for the challenges. He's really worried, and Violet tells him not to worry. She knows what she's doing. She has a plan for the challenge, and like she's basically like, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." She does not tell him that she's planning on poisoning her opponent at breakfast.
I do find that really funny that because like it's not technically cheating, but I feel like she kind of thinks it is.
Yeah. Like she has to keep telling herself that like it's not cheating. I'm just preparing.
Yes.
Let's see. We learned that Jack's murdered a bunch more people, surprise, surprise, and Dane tells Violet to stay away from Jack, which she automatically thinks of how opposite that advice is from what Xaden gave her.
Yeah.
And she then feels guilty about not telling Dane about the meeting, but she's still resolved not to because she knows that he's basically like he's honor bound. He's going to tell somebody about it. So she's resolved not to tell him. Dane tries to recommend sneaking Violet to the scribes again, but the bell rings, saving her from having to have the same stupid argument again. And then Violet serves Oren Seafort poisoned eggs that morning in preparation for their match that afternoon. Later that day, Professor Kaori is lecturing the class about the different types of dragons and their temperaments and like how to approach them and things. I just have a note, Riddick is ridiculous as always. Um,
Really, my favorite people in the series. I
he's
love him.
so funny. I love him. We find out that this year there's 100 dragons who are willing to bond, unless some of them change their mind after the presentation. This is fewer dragons than the previous year, and we find out there's basically fewer dragons year over year that are choosing to bond, and no one knows why. We learn that dragons don't talk to humans other than their bonded rider, and they only give their full names to their bonded rider. And we also learn that the wards are faltering more and more. So, like, lots of stuff going on in this class here. While they're looking at the different kinds of dragons, Professor Kaori brings up a picture of Sigale, blue dragon, basically warning students, like, if you ever see this dragon without her rider, just run. Like, don't engage. And then he's like, any blue dragon, but Sigale is like by far the most powerful blue dragon, so definitely do not engage if you see her without her rider. We find out that she actually bonded with one of Xaden's ancestors, so apparently she likes that bloodline, I guess. I don't know. And Violet ponders again at Xaden not killing her when he had the chance. Then we are introduced to a type of dragon, the black dragon. They are humongous. They have a morning star tail, which is extremely lethal, and they're basically like the deadliest dragons out there. Only one is in service, and that is General Melgren's dragon. A picture that they have up is of the only other black dragon, I think in the Vale, but he is not willing to bond this year. Jack, of course, good old Jack is super excited and is like, but how do I approach this dragon? I want this dragon. I want like the most deadly dragon out there. And General Malgren is like, yeah, like it's not gonna happen. He had a rider. The rider died in service, and this black dragon does not want to bond with anyone. So just forget it. We also learned then, like after class, Professor Kaori tells Violet that the Black Dragon's rider died trying to save Brennan. He tried to like revive Brennan when Brennan was too far gone. And the dragon or the rider burned out and basically died because he was trying to use too much power. Professor Carey also tells Violet that even though Brennan and Mira were both like fantastic writers, Violet is smarter than them and has more compassion than them. And that this is not, she's like, well, this is like a weakness, and he's like, not all strength is physical, and kind of leaves her with that, which I love Professor Kaori.
One of my favorites. He's incredible. Also, I love his power to project. That's so
I
fun.
know, it's amazing.
Such a fun one to have.
It's amazing. Which I do have notes about that. We'll have to get into that in like the world building portion. Later on, while Rhiannon is just like casually beating her challenger senseless, Dane tells Violet that Dane is like, Xaden's trying to kill you, just like out of the blue. And she's like, whatever, because she knows that Xaden already didn't kill her. Also, she's also like, literally everyone knows. And she's like, so Violet brushes this off and then notices that Oren is looking a little green on his challenger's mat before their challenge starts. And this is good because she did poison him. Jack taunts Violet, and so she decides to throw some daggers at him. Um, one lands an inch beneath his manhood, and the other a hair's width from his ear. And Dane is extremely unhappy with Violet because he's like, I told you to leave him alone. Um, and Violet threw daggers at Jack instead. And then Violet feels Xaden's eyes on her, and so she like turns to meet his eyes and her heart flutters.
Honestly, if I make eye contact with an attractive man, same.
So it is Violet's turn for the mat. Oren looks very green and he's slow moving, but he's taunting Violet about her bones snapping. He's clearly feeling queasy, though. Violet dodges Orin's attack and kicks him to the ground and holds a dagger and, like, basically holds him at dagger step and is demanding that he yield. He starts vomiting instead and is forced to yield. And then, so this is a fun thing, Violet collects his dagger. Basically, you earn your daggers, and so every challenger that you defeat, you get to claim their daggers. So she claims her first other person's dagger. She's earned it. Violet continues to win her challenges with the help of various poisons for the next 5 weeks. And on the sixth week, she's like feeling pretty good about herself. She's like, got it handled. However, she administered her poisoning to her challenger a little too soon. And so the challenger's already in the infirmary. And she's like, oh, I guess I can skip this week. But then Xaden volunteers to challenge Violet. And that's where we end chapter 8. Chapter 9 is going to be just a lot more of my hot mess thoughts, so get ready for it.
It's all of our thoughts because this whole chapter,
This whole chapter, ugh.
it's one of the best.
Professor Emeterio happily tells everyone to watch closely because Xaden is one of the best fighters. Dane tries to get Violet out of fighting Xaden, but Xaden, as the wing leader, is like, no, I'm gonna do this, and like it shuts him up basically. He pulls rank. Xaden gives all of his weapons to Imogen to hold, causing a brief flash of jealousy in Violet, but Violet keeps all of her daggers on her. And then they begin sparring. Violet flings a dagger, Xaden catches it and throws it off to the side of the mat. Then he takes Violet down and discards the other knife that she has in her hand. Xaden calls Violet violence for the first time, and I just have in parentheses internal scream, as he continues to disarm her, noting that his nickname for her suits her better than like the delicate Violet that her name actually is. There's some hot sparring and disarming, all while warning Violet not to trust anyone. Dane is glaring murder at Xaden while Xaden continues to teach Violet as he's disarming her. Violet is getting more and more annoyed. Xaden reveals to
Xaden
Violet.
is also,
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, just a bit about the daggers. Xaden is throwing the daggers at the feet of Dane every time he disarms her.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. He like makes there's like a point where it's like kept throwing it at Zane.
Yes.
At Zane. Yeah.
So, Xaden reveals to Violet that he knows she's been poisoning her opponents, but tells her that this is preventing her from getting better at fighting. So they continue sparring until Xaden pins Violet to the ground, him on top, in a rather intimate position, and Violet is affected. And honestly, so are the rest of us.
That's interesting to watch, right?
Yeah.
Like this is in public.
Right. Like everyone is just watching this happen.
Everyone in the whole quadrant is probably watching this at this point. Right? They're like, is she gonna die?
Yeah. So while essentially Xaden is like, Violet is pinned to the floor and he is on top of her. It says that he's like between her legs and like has her pinned down. And he like also like she tries to like move her hand and then he pins her arm to the ground as well above her head. And I was just like, oh my goodness. And then, so while he's got her pinned like this, he basically lifts her arm with the dagger and he shows her how to attack from the position she's in, pinned under him, telling her that she won't always have the time to poison her enemy. So if she's ever caught like this is how you disarm and kill your opponent. Like, this is how you do it. He's now just calling her violence, my note says.
Yeah. Same now.
He also says, like, he's known poison masters, and although Violet is like, he can tell what she's doing and she's doing like a pretty good job. It's extremely obvious and she needs to be more subtle with it. Dane yells from the sidelines that Violet has been taught enough. Because remember, Violet is pinned to the ground in a very intimate position. So basically, Xaden rearms Violet in a really hot way and tops it off with a defenseless women have never been my type, and the entire world swoons. I'm sorry, everyone. If you can't tell, I'm in love with Xaden.
You're supposed to be at this point. Also, that line is incredible. I remember reading that the first time and like being like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty certain I read this the first time when we were working together.
Yes.
So
Yes, you did. Tidbit, I read this book because Colleen was reading this book and when we worked together, and she was like, "You have to read this." And I was like,
I
"Okay,
was like,
okay." And she was like, "No, you have to read this." And then Iron Flame was coming out. So I was like, "Okay, okay." So I got Fourth Wing and I read it at the same time that Colleen was reading it, and we it was so fun. Work was very fun for that like week.
it was great. Yeah, we power read through this book.
Yep, we sure did. So Xaden has let Violet up, and Dane is like worrying unnecessarily over Violet because Violet's fine. Xaden didn't hurt her. And Xaden tells Dane to stop protecting Violet and to start teaching her and leaves them with that, which is very good advice.
It is, yeah. I mean, she's at this point probably not going to get out, so you might as well teach her how to protect herself if she's gonna
Right,
do that.
exactly. Later that night, Violet is getting a back massage from Dane. So Violet is like topless except for a band around her chest, and she's like laying down on Dane's bed and he's like massaging her back.
Clearly
Violet,
not for the first.
yeah, clearly not for the first time. Like they've been friends since childhood, so like he's very well aware of like her physical limitations, even though she's getting stronger because she's training and all of that. But this is
Yeah,
clearly something that he's done for her before. While he's doing this, Violet tells him that Xaden isn't going to try to kill her, especially in front of a bunch of people. So he needs to stop like being weird and trying to protect her in front of everyone. She's like, Xaden's, if he's gonna try to kill me, it's not gonna be in front of like literally everyone.
yeah.
She also wonders how Xaden would have been able to bond with Sigale if he were a threat to Navarre. And Dade admits that no dragon would bond with a separatist if they weren't 100% honest about wanting to protect Navarre. We learn that dragons are in their bonded's heads at all times. A rider can learn to block them out at certain times, but basically, when you bond with a dragon, they are in your mind always.
Which is a lot.
Yeah. Dane admits that he had told Professor Markham, who's like the bigwig scribe, he told Professor Markham about Xaden, Jack, and Orin wanting to kill Violet. Apparently, she found crushed, mutilated violets on her pillow the week before, which is very clearly a threat. And Dane is basically like, he said that he would take you in the scribes quadrant and you can finish out the year there. Violet is pissed off and understandably extremely hurt, where she's like, I have made it this long. Stop trying to save me. I don't want to be saved. I want to be here. And so she finally calls Dane out over his overprotective mansplaining asshole behavior. Is what I wrote. I was very angry at Dane at this point.
At this point, he starts getting like at this point, it's past protective.
Yeah,
It's just being overbearing. I get being like, I talked to Markham. I get even him being like, I talked to Markham last time. Head scribe.
yeah,
This is your choice.
yeah. Which he
Not like
does,
you're.
but he's like, it's not like from like a, hey, this is the last time I'm gonna bring it up. It's like,
No, it's
do
like
this.
do it now. Yeah.
Violet stands up for herself, despite Dane's emotional guilting. He's also like heavily emotionally guilting her. He's like, do it for me. I don't know what would happen to me if you died. I don't know what I would do. I can't lose you.
That's the part that I got angry. That was where like it tipped for me to him just being like, okay, he's trying to be protective and overbearing. It's annoying, but he's at least trying to help her.
Yeah.
At this point, he's just emotionally manipulating,
Yeah.
which I hate.
Exactly. So yeah, the emotional manipulation is sucky. Um, Violet concedes that she will think about sneaking into the scribe quadrant before threshing in 5 weeks. Threshing is basically where riders try to bond with a dragon. Which brings us to chapter 10, finally. This is a long chapter recap. I have I have so many notes for chapter 10, so buckle up.
Yeah.
All right, so chapter 10, it's time to prepare for the gauntlet, an obstacle course designed to test the cadet's ability to ride a dragon. Each part of the gauntlet tests like a skill that a rider must have to ride and fight on and fight with a dragon, basically. We are introduced to Orly, one of the squad members that of Violet Squad, who like they still haven't lost anyone, which is like a huge achievement. they're the only squad that hasn't lost anyone. Orly has been waiting to do the gauntlet her whole life. She gives Rhiannon and Violet a couple of tips on some of the obstacles. We see Tynan again. He makes a snide remark about Violet, and Riddick, to Violet's surprise, tells Tynan to shut up. Riddick tells Tynan that just because he's friends with Jack and Orin, it doesn't give him the right to bully his own squad mate. And Tynan points out that their times for the gauntlet are not only marked individually, but also by squad, and that's going to dictate the order in which they're presented to the dragons. Sawyer, who is the cadet who had to repeat his first year because he didn't bond with a dragon last year, steps in and assures them that their time doesn't have anything to do with whether they'll bond a dragon or not. So this is the first of, I believe, 10 practice hours that the squad gets to train for the gauntlet. Professor Emeterio calls the squad to order, kind of like, all right, I'm like, this is what we're gonna do, and then he goes to check on something. While he's gone, Tynan makes a remark about Violet sleeping with Dane, and she thinks to herself, well, if there's gonna be rumors, she might as well get some of the perks, but she's not even getting that. She thinks Dane would be too caught up on the whole rule forbidding this type of tryst to ever do such a thing with her, which sad, but that's fine. Rhiannon shuts up the gossip, revealing to the squad that Dane's dad is Violet's mom's aide. And Dane and Violet have been friends for ages. She's like, what is wrong with you, you idiot? Don't you know anything about our, like, nation's leaders? Basically. So we find out the cadets have 10 practice sessions to figure out how to get to the top of the gauntlet within an hour to be ranked for presentation for the dragons. Sawyer goes first to show his squad how to get through the gauntlet, and then it's the cadets' turns. So they line up and they're sent off basically in 60-second intervals. Violet realizes that she's too short for the last step of the gauntlet, which is basically like a ramp that's almost 90 degrees. It's very steep. And she's watching her fellow squad mates go through the gauntlet, and she's like, I don't know how I'm going to get up that ramp. We'll see. Then it's time for Violet to start. She makes it through her fear and a few tiers of the gauntlet by reciting information about dragons that she's memorized with her scribe's mind. Reciting knowledge calms Violet enough to get through some of the very precarious sections of the gauntlet. Orly helps Violet through a couple of the obstacles before getting distracted by a dragon that's flown overhead, and sadly, tragically, Orly falls to her death, making her the first person in Violet's squad to die. Rebecca, again, it's like Dylan all over again. You get introduced to a character, you get attached to them, and then they die.
We love this. We love
Yeah,
this.
it's so fun.
I actually now get nervous anytime she like names a new character because I'm
Right.
like,
I'm like, are you just gonna
"Wait,
kill them?
we're just gonna see them die."
So the next morning, as the death roll is called, Violet grieves for the cadets. She now knows who have died on the gauntlet the day before. And then I just have over here the death roll is the last time a deceased person's name is ever supposed to be said again. So more of that like weird, like very strict religious thing being interjected. So the fact that she says Brennan's name, even to herself all the time, is like a little bit of an act of rebellion, which I found interesting.
Yeah.
Violet volunteers to take care of Orly's belongings. She has to take them to the burn pit to be burned as is tradition. And she takes on this responsibility because she's the last one who saw Orly, basically. We find out Violet did not make it up that ramp. She had to use the ropes next to it to climb back down. This is not going to be an option when it's like actually time for the gauntlet, so she needs to figure out how she's going to make it up that ramp because she will die if she doesn't. Violet goes to the burn pit and she burns all of the belongings of Orly. She vows that she's not going to die at the gauntlet and seriously considers Dane's offer to sneak into the scribe quadrant. She's like, I'm not dying at the gauntlet either way. If I stay, I'm not dying, or maybe I should just sneak into the scribe's quadrant and not die that way. Either way, I am not dying. I refuse to die. But something about the thought of sneaking into the scribe's quadrant at this point feels very wrong to her. She's like thinking to herself, like, I've made it this far. I deserve to be here, right? Like, so many other cadets have died at this point. So she's like, sees the scribe squad as something akin to like giving up a little bit. She does not want to do that. On her way back from the burn pit, having just seen three dragons flying overhead going back towards the Vale, Violet spots Xaden, Garrick, and Bodhi and realizes that they had been out. She overhears them arguing over something, but Xaden stops, and Violet knows that Xaden knows she's there. Xaden dismisses the others and then looks exactly to where Violet is sitting. They talk about why each is out after curfew, neither answering, and Violet asks if Xaden is going to kill her or not. There is angry flirting.
Most of their flirting, I
Yeah,
feel like, is just angry flirting.
it's just angry flirting. Violet admits that. Oh, Violet notices that while Xaden's tone is ominous and aggressive, and he has like his hand, he's like holding her, his touch is extremely gentle. Like his voice is aggressive, he's not being aggressive. Um, and she also notices that he smells like mint, leather, and something citrusy slash florally, which I'm like, okay,
Apparently, Xaden had time to go get cologne at
apparently.
some point.
Or it's his natural scent, because in fantasy, like everyone smells like things naturally,
That's
which I find very confusing. Like, what do I smell like? I don't know, like skin? I don't know. Violet admits that she can't make it up the ramp, and Xaden jokes that keeping her alive is harder than killing her. And Violet is basically like, really, I mean, she's very demoralized at this point. She's like, hope is the most dangerous thing in the Writer's Quadrant. Like, I was forced to come here, but then I made it through everything, and then Orly died. And Xaden's like, yeah, so you got hopeful, you got a little bit confident in yourself, and then Orly dies, and then you can't make it up the ramp. So what, you're gonna sneak to the Scribes Quadrant and live the rest of your days there? And Violet is surprised that Xaden knows of Dane's plan to sneak her out. And he's like, I am a shadow wielder. My shadows see and hear everything. And then he's like, they can also conceal everything and wraps them in shadows. And as they're having this like heated discussion about Violet's survival, she feels a shadow caress one of the bruises on her face gently. Xaden says that while Xaden is like, why do you think you're still alive? And Violet's like, I don't know, are you gonna kill me or not? And he goes, basically, he's like, you're still alive because every day that I don't kill you and you survive, I get to convince myself that I'm still a decent person. And then Violet's like, well, you don't have to worry about killing me anyways because I'm not going to make it up that ramp. I'm going to die. And that's when Xaden is like, you already have everything you need to get up that, like, to complete the gauntlet. And she's like, what do you mean? And he says, the right way isn't the only way. And then he leaves Violet. And the chapter ends with Violet cursing his name. That brings us to the end of our chapter recap. So
Yeah.
we are introduced to Orly. I think we're reintroduced to Tara and Tynan. We get an introduction to Orin Seifert, who is friends with Jack Barlow and sucks. So we're
Okay.
introduced to Garrick, Bodhi, and Liam, who are some of the separatists, the marked ones, so to speak. And I think this is the first time that we're introduced to Professor Kaori as well.
Okay.
And then there's a handful of others. There's like Luca is a cadet, and I think that might be all of the names that we get. Like we said in the last episode, there's just a lot of names. There's a lot of characters in this
A lot
book.
of names, and like some of them will remember, and some of them you won't, and like you
Yeah.
don't really know which ones are gonna be important, which I think is really smart, literary wise. Like they're introduced, and like you're not really certain by the way they're introduced which one's necessarily important and not.
Yeah.
Riddick, you meet Riddick.
We met Riddick, but I don't think we met Sawyer in the first episode. So we meet Sawyer, who is he was a first year the previous year, but he did not bond with a dragon, and so he's repeating the first year so that he for the chance of bonding with a dragon again.
I would hate that
Yeah,
nightmare.
it is nightmare. But he's got a really good attitude though.
Right. Yeah, he's just like, all right, Miss Dragon, try again.
Yeah.
This is fine. I guess he knows how to do everything, so he's just like, easy year for me. I just gotta get a dragon.
Yeah, correct. Um, shall we move to section superlatives?
Absolutely.
All right, section superlatives. Drama queen of the section.
It's gotta be Dane.
It has to be Dane.
Like, particularly in this section.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I think that we've discussed it at length during the chapter recap, but like, dude has got to stop. He's making Violet's safety about him. It's not even about her anymore. It's just about him.
Well, he's also not even doing anything to actually help keep her safe
Right.
either, which I think is what Zayden was trying to point out, and that's kind of what we were talking about, like with him throwing them at his feet of like, this is on you for not helping her in a way that's actually going to be helpful at this point.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
such a good point. Um, Craziest thing to happen.
For me, Orly dying in the
Yeah.
gauntlet, like
Shocking.
her, because like she was a legacy. Like I don't know if we mentioned that. Like her family, like the reason she knows about the gauntlet is I think her brother and her dad
Hmm.
both went through it. She knew about it. She's been like training. I don't know if you're like a ninja warrior person, but like those like little kids that like
Hmm.
scurry along things. Like that was her growing up,
Yeah.
right? And she just died.
Yeah, and that was like truly shocking. I mean, at this
Yeah,
point, we know the world that we're in, but this was like, you know,
be
10
consistent with
chapters
it.
in. This is like more than 100 pages in. We're introduced to a new character, and then she just dies.
Mhm. You're just like, oh, she also seems like lovely. Like
Yeah.
all of the people that like have been introduced and die, like they're not like you want them to die kind of
Hmm.
characters. Like this is a like, they seem really interesting. They seem to be helpful, really capable.
Yes, and unfortunately they die, and it's the worst.
Yeah.
MVP. It's Zayden. It's gotta be.
She can say Violet, but I like Zayden as well.
If you can't tell, I love Zayden.
Zayden in terms, I can't get into that. I also love Zayden, but I really love Violet in this book. I love her like her way of thinking to get around her
Hmm.
um like things that she knows her weak points
Yeah,
are. She uses it. The poisoning thing is incredible. I love like
that's
women who
very
poison
true.
storylines.
Yeah, women being poisoners, like there's just something so satisfying about it.
It's well because it's an actual historical way that women used to handle bad situations that they
Yeah.
were in. So I think it's really interesting when it's put in novels.
Hmm. I love it.
So
This
Zayden does get an MVP, but for this section in particular, I'm gonna give it to Violet.
That's fine. We can have two MVPs. I mean, I feel like Violet's gonna be MVP for the entire book, but we can still mention why every single episode.
Yeah.
I got the feeling during this section of chapters, Violet gives Dangerous Woman vibes. You know the Ariana Grande song, Something
Yeah.
About You makes me feel like a dangerous woman. Um,
Yes. I love it.
and
That is a
it's
very Violet.
and something about Xaden makes her feel like a dangerous woman because while she already was poisoning people, she literally throws daggers at Jack because of something that Xaden said to her.
Yeah.
Love it.
Love it. Also, don't know why she hasn't poisoned Jack yet.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think she's only trying to poison the people that she's up in challenges against because she doesn't want to kill anyone.
She does not, but she could still weaken Jack enough to where he would be less of a threat to her.
Yeah, but that would have to be constant. That would take a lot more planning, I think.
Fair, but
Yeah,
that's what I would do personally.
just continuously poison him.
Mhm.
I mean, that's
Yes,
fair.
he's trying to kill her. I would not feel bad.
That's fair. Okay, shall we get into world building? Okay, so I have a few notes here. We learn again, like this book is, there's just so much information, so much is happening. So we get a little bit more about like the magic and the dragons of it all. We learn that there's different types of dragons. So there's like blue dragons, green, orange, red, and black. There's something called a feather tail, which Violet mentions very briefly. They're a very mysterious type of dragon. No one really knows anything about them. Dragons, very much, dragons are like, they have a society, they have rules, they have civilization, and they only let their riders in on like need to know basis. So,
Yeah,
which I think is very cool. I love the dragons in this world. Um, But we so and then like they have different types of like temperaments based on what kind of dragon they are. There's different ways to approach them and things like that. I think we get more information in the next few chapters when they start doing like the presentation and Violet really tells us all of the information that we need. But
Yeah.
I just loved it and I just loved
I
that whole
love the
thing.
dragons in this
Yeah.
book. They're so well thought out. Like I think we've mentioned this before, and like you were kind of touched on it, but like even in like other books, even if like you can communicate with the dragon, which is I think we learned in this, like I don't feel like they're like a structure. They're
Hmm.
almost like lone wolf kind of thing, where they're like on their own, or like they're really rare. Like they're not really rare in this. Like clearly, if 100 are willing to bond, they're pretty. There's a lot of them,
Right.
right? So that they're like vast and organized, which I find really cool.
Yes. Also, speaking of the dragons, so when the picture of the black dragon is up, we find out that this black dragon is 100 years old, which is roughly middle-aged for dragons.
Love a middle-aged man.
Love it.
Love that.
Love it. Um, we learn about two more signets, or I guess we learn about three more signets in this section of chapters. We have menders. We find out that Brennan was a mender, actually. I think I forgot to mention that.
But yeah,
Um,
he was,
The
which is
guy,
cool.
oh, I guess four other signets. So there's the Menders. The previous rider of the Black Dragon that died was
See a siphon?
a siphon, yes. So basically, he can take other people's powers and then project them. So when he was trying to heal Brennan, essentially he was siphoning Brennan's mending power and trying to revive him. And
You
then
mentioned that.
but then he burned out, which like he tried to use too much power and like basically it overtook him and he died trying to save Brennan.
Yeah.
We learn about illusionists. They can make illusions. Professor Kaori in particular, he can project what's in his mind out. So he's leading this class and there he's projecting all the different kinds of dragons and stuff. These are all dragons that he's personally seen. And then we get the shadow wielding. I have a lot of questions. The shadows seem to be sort of all powerful. They can see everything, they can hear everything, and apparently communicate this to Xaden.
And
Um,
you can physically touch
they can
things.
physically touch things, like they touch Violet's face, they grab the daggers from the tree and give them back to Xaden, and they can conceal in shadow. Like, very, very useful power to have.
Which they talk about it being one of the more powerful signets,
Hmm.
like there or ever on the continent.
Yeah. Then I guess we should talk about like the religion. So basically,
Yeah.
we learn there's like different gods, but Malik, the god of death specifically,
Mhm.
um,
Mentioned a lot.
yeah, mentioned a lot because they're in the Rider's Quadrant. So we
Mhm.
basically learn that after a person dies, the reason that they have like death rolls where they read out the names of the deceased every morning is not only to tell everyone who died, but also that's the last time that anyone can mention their name ever again. You're supposed to burn all of the belongings of the deceased person as well. So basically, you have nothing left to grieve that person with,
Yeah.
which is crazy. And then also, kind of going along with that, when cadets die in the Dragon's Quadrant, their families have two options. They can come and collect the ashes and the belongings and take care of it, like at home with their families, or they can not come and do anything, and then it's like the Dragon Riders Quadrant that like burns and burns the body and the belongings and all of that. And Orly's family chose not to come get her things, so like that's why Violet is burning her things.
I was curious if they actually chose or if her family really was in active service, they may not have been allowed to. I was
Maybe.
curious about that. Because, I mean, it seems like most of her family was in
It
service.
says that they chose option two, but I mean,
Yeah,
it could just
that's
be a
fair.
figure of speech. So,
Yeah, that makes sense. I was curious about that because it just seems like she was so close to her family. It seemed odd to me.
yeah, it did seem odd. So yeah, going back to that whole like lack of therapy thing, it
But this world is truly fixed by therapy.
yeah. Like, oh, someone died. Well, we're never gonna talk of them again, and you don't have anything to remember them by. So have fun.
Peace. They
Yeah.
never existed.
Yep.
Okay, so this actually came to me today, which kind of has to do with the dragons. I was watching a YouTube thing. I'm a big YouTube girly. I don't know a crazy amount about this. I will state this ahead of time. And some people kind of consider this like a pseudoscience-y thing. Also a thing. Color theory, I think, is really interesting in this world and
Mm.
how it affects people. And I think Rebecca uses it in a lot of ways, which is common in literature as well. Like different colors, the whole like green light in what is it, Gatsby, or like I've
Yeah.
never read the book, but apparently there's some book that has some really big significance about. No, I've read Gatsby.
Oh,
No, the
okay.
other one. No, I was a huge Gatsby girly in high school. There's a book about like some sort of blue curtains. I don't know about it, but I heard people talk about this where these like blue curtains apparently are supposed to like signify someone's mental state, and like it was a whole thing.
Okay.
That was the main one that I've heard of that people get upset about. But there's like different colors that evoke different feelings and that we typically associate with them. And I think that kind of is how she assigned the dragons, which I thought was interesting. So like blue. So what I find intriguing about it in particular, which is why I made me think of it, is blue is typically like a calming color.
Yes.
It's very calming, very soothing. I don't think anyone's gonna label Sigale as a calm, soothing person.
No.
But like I feel like she used a lot of the other ones, so like red. I feel like they said red dragons are really aggressive.
Mhm.
Like well, she didn't say brown is wise. I don't know. It was just definitely really interesting. So like brown dragons were like the wise and the smartest. I think green. I can't remember. I think they were a little bit temperamental, which I thought was intriguing. Red is like the sassy. Like red and orange is
Yeah.
the aggressive
Which
ones.
makes sense.
Uh,
That or like that's like more that makes more sense with the color theory that I am familiar with.
Yes, yeah. So there's like that element of like associating with stuff, but there's also the element of like when you're around blue or you're like in a blue room, it's supposed to make you feel calm or like sad, or like red makes you angry or aggressive. So that's kind of where some of that color stuff, like literary color stuff, I think comes in, is from like the emotion it evokes.
Mhm.
And I thought it was interesting how she used it in here. Um, and that honestly I think comes into play a little bit more later. But like so I think so I guess in my head, which is kind of where I was going with this, is so like blue is supposed to be like trustworthy and like comforting and all of this stuff. Very strongly associated with the color blue, especially
Honestly,
because of Segale. I feel
yeah.
like he's very strongly associated with that color, and typically I feel like a villain is associated with like red
Hmm.
or like that kind of darkness. Also black. There's a lot of black involved
Yeah.
with all the writers, but I don't know. I just think it's interesting that like this like trustworthy, soothing, like I don't know, comfort color is associated with this like grumpy, murdery like, man.
Yeah. He is a
That's
grumpy,
all
murdery man.
he is with shadows. Like, so it's just kind of an intriguing, which I also think shadow wielders are tend to be associated with blue. If you know anything about at least modern book wise, that
Mhm.
tends to be a
Like Azriel, with his
in a
he has
sort of
the blue.
blue set siphons, yes.
Yeah.
And then what was the other one? There's another book that has like a shadow wielder that I think he's also associated with blue. So maybe it's just like something to do with that. I don't know like when all of that trend started, to be honest. But I just think it's really interesting. And I think there's more like once, like you said, once we learn a little more about the dragons later and their temperaments. But I do definitely think that like I feel like in this book, color is very strongly associated with character and how they act and behave. And I
Yes.
find that interesting.
And we're definitely going to find out more about that in the coming chapters. So that's exciting.
Yes, there's more about like character development. So it's just kind of something I wanted to introduce. And I think as we go along, there's a theory that I've seen about the color of dragons that I'm not going to get into.
Random thoughts. All
So
right, random thoughts. Okay, random thoughts, no spoilers. I hate Dane.
I don't think it's far-fetched thing to say that I don't think we are supposed to like him at this point necessarily,
Mhm.
and he's written to be unlikable at this point, I
Yes.
think.
I have a theory that Rebecca read A Court of Thorns and Roses and was like, Tamlin's not dislikable enough. Let me fix that.
A little bit. I do find it really intriguing that like from the jump, he's kind of insufferable. Like there was really nothing like we know that Violet finds him like
Mhm.
from their past and all of this stuff. like, wonderful. We don't really get like oh, Dane is like lovely and nice. We never get that. It's just immediately bad.
Yeah.
Just immediately like, let's get you out here. Outside of, I guess, helping wrap her leg and like massaging her knots. Like there's some
Yeah.
elements of
Like
him
they're
that is
friends. They're
really,
friends. I
yeah.
think that Violet, when she was training to be a scribe her whole life, the whole like protective thing was nice.
Well, it was also necessary.
Yeah, and
Like
necessary.
you have,
And she likes Dane. Like they've been friends forever. But then like as soon as the situation changes and she decides that she wants to be in the Dragon Riders quadrant, all of a
mhm,
sudden Dane does not understand. He refuses to understand the change in her thought process. And like
yeah,
basically like she I think there's a little bit of them both refusing to see that they've changed.
I agree. And I think that's where some of the like, not to give Dana a pass because it's not, but I honestly can't imagine. Like we've seen already just a little bit in the first like what 5 weeks that she's been
Mhm.
there. Like how many people she's seen die, what's happening. Like that will trauma crazy
Yeah.
in Dane's brain. Like I am sure he is in like full crazy panic trauma mode. Like I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Like all of that on top of like having a dragon and having another person in your brain, like that has to be insane.
I
Um,
wonder how much the dragon contributes to Dane's actions.
right.
Honestly, I never thought of that before.
I've been curious about that because I would assume if your brain is connected, there's gonna be like I mean, you're sharing thoughts back and forth.
Yeah.
So, and it's also like someone that I'm assuming you're gonna trust pretty well. And so, like, if your dragon is like, you're also, yeah, like, you're gonna have some of those personality traits of your dragon. Same as like people who hang out with other people, like, you take on their like mannerisms and
Yeah.
traits and thoughts.
Yeah.
So,
And like maybe the dragon, I mean that there's that whole thing, a dragon without its rider is a tragedy, rider without its dragon is dead. How much do the dragons care about their riders then? I would
yeah,
assume they learn to care about them a great deal. So maybe like Dane's freaking out and his dragon is like, get her out of here. Like you
yeah.
don't want to feel this, like get her out of here. Maybe the dragon is insufferable and Dane's just
You know, I it could be a little bit of both. I do also think so. Violet has mentioned multiple times, and I think this is just maybe he's just this way. We all know someone like this, but they're just so by the rules
Mhm,
that they cannot even get out of their own head to like process that like other things are happening. He was like, this was the expectation.
mhm.
That expectation was not met, and he cannot get his brain to unlatch from this initial expectation.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I
Yeah,
I do think that like that all like I've thought about all of that. I am so all of a sudden very curious about how the dragon plays into all of this stuff because it
yeah.
must. Now that I think about it, it must.
Which also I think explains like the different types of dragons is like I'm assuming they pick the human based on their temperament and what they want that person to be.
Mhm.
We also don't know how much these dragons necessarily know about. Like we don't really know how like do they like how do they communicate with them in terms of like how do they tell these dragons what these people are like? Are they watching them while they're
Right.
doing these things? We don't really know.
Yeah, we don't know a lot. Are the
We don't know that.
dragons communicating behind the scenes? Like dragons talk to each other. We don't know what they talk about. We have no idea what dragons do, essentially.
We have no clue. Yes, it's
We
essentially where we're getting at is there's just a lot of like Mr. I'm assuming by the time, hopefully, Violet lives, I think we're assuming she's going to live. She's the main character. At least for the first book, when she
yes.
gets the threshing and hopefully bones a dragon. She could be someone, though, that doesn't bone the dragon. We'll
Right.
get to learn a
Hmm.
little bit more. It probably seems likely that she's not going to bone the dragon
It
if
does.
what they're saying is accurate in
It
terms
does.
of like strength and
I do
focus.
think that I love Professor Kaori so much because he's like the literally the only person, honestly, other than Zayden, who's like, you're smart.
Yeah,
That is a strength. Like,
yeah.
that is a strength, and that can be viewed as a strength. Like, it's not just physical dominance that is going
Yeah,
to be a
I
strength that dragons are looking at. So,
I feel like if I had to live in someone's head all day, every day, I wouldn't want to live in Jack Barlow's head.
absolutely not. I wonder how much the writer can drive the dragon crazy too.
Right? It would have to. I'm assuming maybe if they're older, maybe they have more of like a ability to like get out of there or like shut up
Yeah,
kind of thing. I don't know. But yeah, that would be, I don't know. That's such an interesting concept of like they're always there. It's like
yeah.
Santa Claus, but with dragons.
It's like Santa Claus. Do we want to talk about like the extremely small tidbit of Xaden telling the first years during their illegal meeting to keep what they know, but just
What do we know?
recite what they're being
Yeah.
taught, quote unquote, taught in class?
Yeah, what does that mean?
What do you
It's
mean? Conspiracy, conspiracy. There's just like what this ties back into the whole thing that we talked about in the first episode of like this book is a transcription or
yeah,
like
what does
a
that mean? Yeah.
yeah.
Like, I do find it really intriguing, especially, and I feel like Violet does too, because Violet was training to be these scribes
Yeah.
that like are the keeper of the information and teach. Like the battle brief one is really most. I mean, it's taught by like a general person, but like it's taught by Markham.
Hmm.
Like it's by a scribe
Yeah.
who she studied with for years.
Right. And like scribes are their whole like thing is to document history and provide the information necessary to like
Mhm.
keep going and keep moving forward
And it's supposed to be accurate and without,
without
um,
bias.
which just a tidbit for you, it's impossible to do. As so
Absolutely.
that's a whole thing in sociology as well. You're supposed to be like a observer and write down what you're observing, but your biased perspective is going to affect what you're writing down. Like
Mhm.
there's no objective keeping of history
Yeah.
as much as you would want it to be. It's just not a thing.
Yeah.
That's a whole other argument if we're gonna,
No, it's completely
everyone's always
true.
a villain depending on who writes down history.
Yes.
That's who ends up being the villain. So
Exactly. No, I agree. I love how much there's like this book is so complex. It's like there's the whole college trials, war
mhm,
college aspect of the thing going. There's like all of these deadly tasks that they have to do, and you get this like school atmosphere. But then you
mhm.
have like conspiracy, you have people rebelling in small ways, like Nolan saying he never agreed with the whole conscription of the rebellion's children.
And her mom last chapter being
Yeah,
like,
her
I don't think
mom.
they should have to watch their parents die.
Yeah, and then like Violet continuing like having the book of Brennan, which shouldn't exist anymore, and like she continues to say Brennan's name,
Hmm.
which she's
It
not
is.
supposed to.
It seems like the structure was supposed. I feel like the structure of their society as a whole is very militaristic.
Yeah.
I feel like particularly Violet's life because of her mom, but there definitely seems to be like a big disregard of
Hmm.
like the dumb rules. I would say, if
Yeah.
that makes sense, like the ones that aren't really making any sense.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I agree. The whole gauntlet scene um, right up until Orly's death, I'm gonna bring Divergent back into this. It really reminded me of the Dauntless faction where they have, I mean, they essentially they're the military. So Colleen hasn't read this, so I'll explain for everyone.
I've not written
They they essentially are the military faction of their world. So they're really the equivalent of the Dragon Riders, like very much so. But they have all of these like tasks and challenges and like all of this stuff and they have to defeat their fear because they're supposed to be dauntless but there's this one scene in Divergent where they have like a capture the flag obstacle course sort of thing and they have two teams competing against each other and just like the way that Triss the main character she is fearful, but she disregards her fear and like climbs to the top of this like Ferris wheel. It's set in a post-apocalyptic world. So she climbs to the top of this old abandoned Ferris wheel that's like hundreds and hundreds of feet up. And at one point, like the main male character is like, "You're fearless," and she's like, "I'm not fearless. I'm afraid, but this is just what I have to do." And that part of Triss reminds me so much of Violet, who like
it.
she's terrified doing the gauntlet, but she is climbing up that thing. She is
Yeah.
doing it. And like I love that she has so much strength of character. I love maiden female characters who are just completely strong, but not like flawless. Like she's fearful. She's afraid.
She's afraid and like accurately so.
Yeah,
She should be. Yeah.
but she's just doing it. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I do find it interesting that it takes her like I feel like everyone at some point in the squadron has to hit the we're gonna die. Right?
Hmm.
Like I can't do this, I can't overcome this thing. It took a good amount of times to get there. Like once she crosses that parapet, which honestly fair enough. If I want to cross that thing too, I would be invincible. But like once she gets past there, it truly takes her until this gauntlet like final test thing to really be like, I might actually die.
Yeah,
Like that's the only that takes her up until that point.
it does. Which is, I think, again, why I find Dane so frustrating because it's like, can he not see the how much she's
Yeah.
accomplished?
Yeah.
Anyways,
I think he doesn't want to. He
yeah,
wants Violet to be the same Violet that he remembered before he went into the
he
quadrant.
wants Violet to be a defenseless woman. Unlike a certain shadow daddy. Um,
I'm realizing I promise I also really love Zayden. This is not me not saying that I love Zayden and I'm not like a Dane defender. But at the same time, trying to keep it in perspective. No, Dane frustrates the hell out of me. I would have punched him a long time ago. The fact that she doesn't is impressive.
it is
That's
impressive.
the most restricted that girl has shown. Because like if it was someone that I was good friends with, like I have a lot of like good male friends
Mhm.
in my life. If they were behaving this way and not letting me make my own decisions, I
Oh,
would have read them the riot act and knocked them out
immediately. Yeah,
immediately. So much
immediately.
sooner. I wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, like, don't. I would have been like, absolutely not. You and I both know this is not gonna work.
Yeah,
Like, quit.
immediately.
She does, but like less physically aggressive. I feel like
And like very, it takes her a long time to reach that point where she's like,
it does.
can you not?
Yeah, like, can you stop trying to actively ruin my life? Like, I would have. I'm aware. I do think she was a little bit more mild mannered because she was trained to be doing its
Mhm.
survive quadrants before this go round. I don't think she's changed that much.
No, I
To be
don't think
honest,
so
like this
either.
is not like an overnight 6 month change.
Yeah,
So
agreed. All right. Well, concluding thoughts. I have to be honest with you, I legitimately don't remember what happens next, so I'm excited to get ready for the next episode. But this was a really fun section.
it is really fun. Yeah, there's a lot more. Like this whole like it just kind of rock and rolls from
Hmm.
here, and it like kind of has a lot of twists and turns. I've read. I actually just finished Iron Flame this week, so I have read all of Fourth Wing and all of the next book, which is Iron Flame. So I'm trying very hard to keep my thoughts to myself because I do love these books. I am very excited. I also forgot this is actually the first time I've reread the second book, which was really interesting. So, but
It's awesome. Yeah, no, I'm really excited. I believe that in the next section we get to we at least get to the gauntlet, but I believe that we get to presentation and threshing too, and I'm very excited to see what happens.
me too. It's one of my favorite chunks of this book, actually. It's really interesting
Yeah.
the way that like it develops and everything. So I'm very excited. I was hoping we got to the gauntlet this time. When you said gauntlet, I was like, oh, are we gonna get to it? And we did not.
No,
So
no. For
yeah.
those of you who listen along, I have taken on chapter recaps because I have decided that I'm reading the book and I really need to like physically read it to do the chapter recaps. And Colleen has more smartly chosen to consume the entire series so far, which I'm a little jealous of because I feel like I'm reading it for the first time again and I just want to know what happens next so badly. But the chapter recaps are for all of you, but also for Colleen so she knows what not to say.
Accurate, yes. Because I have a hard time not giving away spoilers. So, which is very helpful for me. So
Yes. Yes. So, all right. Well, I guess signing off.
bye.
Bye. Hi, me again. I am here to let you all know where to find us. You can find us on Instagram at bookwitchespod. You can find us on Spotify at bookwitches with a B. You can find us on YouTube at bookwitches with a B, and you can find us on TikTok at bookwitchespod. All of this information is also going to be listed below our episode, and it's going to be listed in the ending credits if you're watching along with us in the videos. We'll catch you guys soon.